Can a heart forged in darkness survive the blinding light of true love? They say in our world, love is a liability, a weakness your enemies will exploit without a second thought. But what happens when that love becomes the only thing worth fighting for? The air in Nico Vitali's villa was as cold and unyielding as the marble beneath Leah's bare feet. It was a gilded cage, each ornate detail a reminder that she was a possession, a debt paid in flesh and blood. Her father, a fool who gambled with monsters, had signed her life away to the Shadow King of the city's underworld. Nico Vitali, a name whispered in fear and reverence. He moved with a predator's grace, his pinstripe suit a shroud over a body built for violence. His eyes, the color of stormy seas, missed nothing. They watched her now as she stood before him in his cavernous study, chin held high, her defiance a flickering candle against his hurricane force. "You are brave," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. "Or you are foolish." Leah's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "I am neither. I am simply a woman who will not be broken by a man who thinks he owns the world." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a chilling, beautiful sight. He circled her, a shark assessing its prey. The scent of expensive cologne, leather, and something uniquely dangerous filled her senses. "I do not think I own the world, Passerina," he murmured, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Her skin burned at the contact. "I simply take what is mine. And you are mine." He expected her to flinch, to cry. He was accustomed to fear. But Leah met his gaze, her own eyes a warm earthy brown, holding a fire he hadn't seen in years. "You can own my body, but you will never own my soul." Nico Vitali. That was the moment the game changed. For him, she was no longer just a debt. She was a challenge. A puzzle. A flicker of warmth in the frozen wasteland of his heart. The days that followed were a silent war of wills. Leah refused to be a docile captive. She explored the vast, lonely villa, her footsteps echoing in halls filled with priceless art in suffocating silence. It was on one of these explorations that she found the heart of the house, and the source of its sorrow. A small girl with Nico's stormy eyes and a silence that mirrored his own sat in a sprawling garden, tending to a bed of white roses. This was Sophia, Nico's daughter, the cherished fragile legacy of a wife lost to the violence that defined their lives. Leah watched from a distance at first, seeing a loneliness that resonated with her own. One afternoon she approached, her heart aching for the child. Sophia didn't look up, her small hands carefully pruning a withered leaf. "They say you're my father's prisoner," the girl said, her voice small but clear. "Are you?" Leah sat on the stone bench beside her. "In a way. But cages don't have to be forever." From that day on, an unlikely friendship blossomed among the roses. Leah read stories to Sophia, her voice bringing to life worlds of magic and adventure, a stark contrast to the grim reality of their own. They baked cookies in the enormous and used kitchen, filling the cold villa with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. Laughter, a sound long absent from those walls, began to echo in the halls. Nico watched from the shadows. He stood in doorways behind pillars, a silent observer to this strange, beautiful invasion of his world. He saw the way his daughter's eyes lit up when Leah entered a room. He saw the genuine smile that touched Leah's lips, a smile she never gave to him. Angelo, his loyal consigliere, saw it too. "She is a complication, Nico," the older man warned, his face etched with concern. "Attachments are weaknesses. Your enemies will see this. Your cousin Rocco, he watches. He is hungry." Nico's jaw tightened. "She is a diversion for the child." Nothing more, but it was a lie, and they both knew it. He found himself seeking her out, engaging her in clipped, tense conversations that crackled with unspoken energy. He would find a book left open and read the passage she'd marked, trying to see the world through her eyes. One night, a storm raged outside, mirroring the one in his soul. He found her in the library, a cashmere blanket wrapped around her, silhouetted by the roaring fire. "You have brought life back into this mausoleum," he said, his voice rough. Leah looked up, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. It wasn't life this house was missing. It was love. His breath hitched. The word was foreign on his tongue, a concept he'd buried with his wife. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking, becoming charged with a dangerous magnetic pull. "Love is a fairy tale, tesoro," he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. And we live in a world of monsters. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his. Even monsters were children once, she replied softly. Even they can remember how to feel. He stared at her, at the impossible, infuriating hope in her eyes. He saw not a prisoner, but a woman of incredible strength, a woman who looked at him and saw not the Shadow King, but the man beneath. And in that moment, Nico Vitali, a man who feared nothing, was terrified. He was terrified of the hope she was igniting within him, a hope he knew could burn his entire world to the ground. The change in Nico was subtle at first, but to those who knew him it was a seismic shift. A softening around the eyes when he looked at his daughter playing with Leah. A hesitation before delivering a brutal order. His cousin Rocco saw it all. He saw it not as a transformation but as a decay, a rot that was weakening the foundations of the Vitali Empire. Rocco, with his slicked-back hair and venomous smile, had always lived in Nico's shadow. He craved the throne, and he saw Leah as the key to taking it. He began to sow seeds of dissent among the capos, whispering about Nico's distraction, his newfound softness. He brings a stray into his home, and suddenly he forgets the meaning of vendetta, Rocco would hiss in smoke-filled back rooms. He is compromised. His heart makes him weak. The whispers grew into a murmur, a current of unrest flowing through the syndicate. Nico was aware of it, but he was caught in Leah's gravity, unable to pull away. He found himself wanting to give her and Sophia something real, a glimpse of a life outside the suffocating luxury of the villa. It was the feast of San Gennaro, a vibrant, chaotic celebration that filled the city's streets with light and music. Against Angelo's strenuous objections, Nico decided to take them. "It is too exposed, Nico. An unnecessary risk," the consigliera pleaded. "They need to feel the sun on their faces," Nico countered, his voice firm. "I will not have my daughter grow up a prisoner too. I will protect them." He cloaked the outing in a blanket of security. His men, loyal and lethal, melted into the crowds, eyes constantly scanning, hands never far from their weapons. For a few precious hours they were almost a normal family. Nico, unsmiling but watchful, bought Sophia brightly colored pastry. Leah, her face alight with a joy he'd never seen, laughed as she won a cheap stuffed animal at a carnival game. In that sea of people under the strings of colored lights, Nico allowed himself a moment of fantasy. He saw a future, one where Leah's laughter was a permanent fixture in his home, where his daughter's sadness was a distant memory. He watched Leah place the stuffed bear into Sophia's arms, her touch gentle, her smile radiant. A warmth spread through his chest, a dangerous, addictive feeling. It was this moment of distraction, this brief lowering of his guard, that Rocco had been waiting for. The first shot was a deafening crack that ripped through the festive music. Chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered. Nico's training took over instantly. He shoved Leah and Sophia towards the ground, his body becoming a shield. His men moved in, forming a perimeter, their own guns drawn. But the assassins were professionals. They had anticipated this. A second gunman, positioned on a nearby rooftop, took aim. The red laser sight danced across the panicked crowd, searching for its target. Nico saw it, a crimson dot of death, settling not on him, but on the terrified face of his daughter Sophia. Time slowed to a crawl. He lunged for his child, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. But he wasn't fast enough. He was going to watch his whole world die for a second time. But before he could reach her, a blur of motion cut in front of Sophia. It was Leah. With a cry that was both fierce and terrified, she threw herself over the little girl, her body absorbing the impossible impact. 1, 2, 3 shots struck her back in rapid succession. She gasped, her body jolting violently. As she crumpled, 3 more bullets found their mark in her side and shoulder. The world went silent for Nico. The screams, the gunfire, the shouts of his men. It all faded into a dull roar. The only thing he could see was Leah, lying in a growing pool of her own blood, her arms still protectively wrapped around his crying, unharmed daughter. He reached her in 2 strides, falling to his knees beside her. Leah. Her name was a raw, broken thing torn from his soul. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain, searching for his. Sophia, is she? She whispered, her breath hitching. She's safe, Nico choked out, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her, afraid of the damage he would find. You saved her. Dio mio, Leah, you saved her. A faint smile touched her blood-stained lips. A cage is still a cage, she murmured, her eyes drifting closed. But sometimes, it's worth protecting what's inside. Her body went limp in his arms. The Shadow King, the man who had brought armies of hardened criminals to their knees with a single glare, let out a cry of pure agony that echoed through the blood-soaked piazza. His men, who had never seen him show an ounce of emotion beyond cold fury, froze in shock. He gathered her into his arms, ignoring the blood that soaked through his expensive suit, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Get the car, he bellowed, his voice cracking. Angelo, find me the man who did this. Find him now. The ride to the private, off-the-books doctor was a blur of sirens and prayers Nico didn't know he remembered. He never let her go, whispering her name over and over, begging her to hold on. He pressed his hand against her worst wound, feeling her life warm and sticky, draining away between his fingers. This was what his enemies had wanted. They had tried to break him by taking his daughter. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had not taken his weakness. They had taken his heart, and in doing so, they had unleashed a monster far more terrifying than the Shadow King they thought they knew. The news of what happened at the festival spread through the underworld like wildfire. The Vitali Dawn, a man of ice and steel, had cradled a bleeding woman in his arms and wept. He had abandoned all protocol, all pretense of strength for her. To his rivals and to the traitor in his midst, it was the final confirmation of his weakness. They prepared to carve up his empire. They were wrong. What they had mistaken for weakness was the forging of something far more dangerous. A singular righteous fury. While Leah lay on an operating table, fighting for her life, Nico Vitali transformed. The cold, calculating Dawn was gone, replaced by a specter of pure, undiluted vengeance. He didn't send his men. He went himself. His first stop was a warehouse belonging to a rival family known for supplying hired guns. He walked in alone, 2 pistols in his hands, and when he walked out 10 minutes later, the warehouse was on fire and he had a name. Rocco. His own blood. His treacherous cousin. The revelation did not surprise him. It only fueled the inferno in his soul. Angelo found him back at the clinic, standing vigil outside Leah's room. His knuckles bloodied. His suit stained with soot and gore. It was Rocco, Nico said, his voice devoid of all emotion. It was colder than Angelo had ever heard it. He aimed for Sophia to break me, to make the family believe I was too emotional to lead. Angelo nodded grimly. The capos are wavering. Rocco is making his move, calling a meeting. Let him, Nico whispered, his eyes fixed on the door to Leah's room. Let the rats gather. It will make the extermination easier. He turned to his consigliere. And the look in his eyes made the old man's blood run cold. It was the abyss. Ready the men, Angelo. Not for a war. For a cleansing. No one who sided with him will see the sunrise. While his army assembled, Nico slipped into Leah's room. She was pale, so pale against the white sheets, a network of tubes and wires tethering her to the living world. He sat beside her, gently taking her hand, careful of the drip. He brought her fingers to his lips, the first truly tender gesture he had ever offered. You looked at me and saw a man, he murmured to her still form, his voice thick with unshed tears. But you were wrong. I am a monster, Miyokor. But you are my soul. And they tried to steal my soul. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to her temple. Hold on, Leah. Just hold on. I am going to burn this world down for you, and I will build a new one from the ashes. A world where you are safe. A world where you are queen. He stood, his resolve hardening into diamond. He walked out of that room not just as a mafia boss, but as a king ready to slaughter anyone who dared to touch what he loved. The underworld was about to learn a new definition of fear. They thought love was Nico Vitali's weakness. They were about to discover it was his greatest weapon. The shock was not that the boss had a heart. The shock was what he was willing to do to protect it. The meeting Rocco called was held in the cellar of an old winery, a place of stone, shadow, and secrets. He stood before the assembled capos, a portrait of smug confidence, outlining his vision for a new, stronger family, one unburdened by Nico's sentimental attachments. "He has forgotten the code," Rocco declared, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "He sheds tears for an outsider while our empire crumbles. He is no longer fit to be the Shadow King." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. They were ready to crown a new leader. The heavy oak door at the far end of the cellar creaked open. All heads turned. Nico Vitali stood there alone, silhouetted against the dim light. He was no longer the impeccably dressed Don. His tie was gone, his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his face was a mask of cold fury. The room fell silent. "My cousin speaks of the code," Nico began, his voice dangerously soft as he walked slowly into the room. "He speaks of strength. But he knows nothing of either." He stopped directly in front of Rocco, who, despite his bravado, took an involuntary step back. "You tried to murder my daughter," Nico said, each word a chip of ice. "You used her to break me. You thought that by showing my heart, I had shown you my weakness." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only Rocco could hear. "You were wrong. You didn't show me my weakness. You showed me what I was fighting for." With a speed that defied belief, Nico's hand shot out, not with a gun, but with a stiletto that seemed to appear from nowhere. He drove it deep into Rocco's shoulder, pinning him to the massive wine barrel behind him. Rocco screamed, a high, thin sound of agony and shock. The capos scrambled for their weapons, but the doors burst open, and Nico's loyalists, led by Angelo, flooded the room, guns raised. It was over before it began. "The old code is dead," Nico announced to the terrified, silent room, his gaze sweeping over every man present. "There is a new code now. My code. Loyalty is not to a name, not to a tradition of violence. Loyalty is to family, to heart. Anyone who threatens my heart, my daughter, or the woman who saved them both answers to me." He wrenched the stiletto from Rocco's shoulder and wiped it clean on his cousin's expensive suit. "Take him," he commanded his men. "I want him to understand the true meaning of lost." Justice was swift. It was brutal. By dawn, the Vitali family had been purged of its traitors, and a new legend had been born. Not of the cold Shadow King, but of a man who ruled with the ferocity of a king protecting his queen. Days later, Leah's eyelids fluttered open. The first thing she saw was not the sterile white of a hospital room, but the warm, rich mahogany of a familiar ceiling. She was in Nico's bedroom. The scent of antiseptic was faint, overpowered by the smell of lemon oil and fresh flowers. She turned her head, a sharp pain reminding her of what had happened. Nico was there, asleep in a chair by her bed, his head slumped forward. He looked exhausted, his face shadowed with stubble, dark circles under his eyes. His hand was loosely holding hers. She squeezed his fingers weakly. His eyes snapped open instantly, alert and wild, like a wolf roused from its den. The wildness softened when he saw her awake. Relief so profound it was almost painful washed over his features. "Leah," he breathed, his voice hoarse. He was on his feet, leaning over her, his hands gently framing her face. "You're awake, Sophia?" was the first word she managed to speak. A true, breathtaking smile transformed Nico's face. "She is safe. She asks for you every hour. You saved her, Leah. You saved us both." Tears welled in his eyes, the unapologetic tears of a man who had faced the abyss and been pulled back from the edge. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a kiss that held a universe of gratitude, reverence, and a love so fierce it stole her breath. "I was wrong," he whispered against her skin. "Love is not a fairy tale. It's the only thing that's real." Over the next few weeks, Leah healed, her body and spirit mended by a tenderness from Nico she never thought possible. He was constantly by her side, feeding her, reading to her, telling her about his plans for a different kind of future. Sophia was their constant companion, a bright, happy child, her laughter finally, truly filling the halls of the villa. The house was no longer a cage. It was a sanctuary. It was a home. One evening as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Nico wheeled her out onto the balcony overlooking the rose garden. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I know what you are," he said softly. "You are not my prisoner. You are not a debt. You are my conscience. My redemption." My queen, he placed a small velvet box in her lap. Inside was not a diamond necklace or a flashy jewel, but a simple gold locket. Inside, one side held a tiny picture of Sophia. The other was empty. It's for you, he said, to fill with a picture of whatever you want your future to be. I hope it will be a picture of us. Leah's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She looked at this man, this former monster, this Shadow King reborn in the light of her love, and she saw her future. She saw everything. She took 6 shots meant for his daughter, and in return he gave her his entire world. Can a mafia boss's heart survive true love? What would you do if the only light in your world of shadows was about to be extinguished? For Nico Vitali, the answer was simple. You don't just survive it. You bow to it. You protect it. You build an empire for it. And you thank God every day for the woman who was brave enough to teach you how to love.